I'm Nima Rajan. Queen Elizabeth has cancelled plans to spend Christmas with her family at Sandringham Estate. Instead, Buckingham Palace says she will be staying at Windsor Castle as the Omicron variant surges throughout the United Kingdom. The palace says this was the Queen's personal decision and reflects a cautionary approach. The four Atlantic premiers have released a statement urging the region's residents to limit their social contacts during the holiday season to slow the spread of COVID-19. Premier Blaine Higgs of New Brunswick led a teleconference last night. It was joined by Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston, PEI Premier Dennis King, and Andrew Furey, Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. They agreed that Atlantic Canadians should limit holiday gatherings to a small, consistent circle of friends and family. Their announcement comes as Quebec set a record for new COVID-19 infections for the third day in a row, with 5,043 new cases. This while, as of Tuesday morning, anyone arriving in the country needs a pre-arrival negative molecular test result for COVID-19. This even if they were away for less than 72 hours. All right, well, meanwhile, the Foreign Affairs Minister is among the many Canadians awaiting results of a PCR test to find out if she really has COVID-19. Melanie Joly disclosed on Twitter that she took a rapid test yesterday, and the result was positive for the virus. She is working in isolation while awaiting confirmation. This comes as many provinces are bringing in new restrictions amid the rapid spread of the Omicron variant. Tonight's two NHL games will be the last before the league takes an earlier than expected holiday break because of COVID-19 outbreaks. All teams will be on hold starting tomorrow, which is 2 days ahead of schedule. Teams will then report back for COVID-19 testing and practice on Sunday, which is a day before games are set to resume. Restaurants Canada and the Canadian Federation of Independent Business have written an open letter to the premiers asking for financial help. The business groups are urging the provinces to provide support for restaurants, retailers, and small businesses who are being hit hard by a fresh round of COVID-19 restrictions at a key earnings period of the year. They say the need for significant and immediate financial help is critical. And in addition to provincial help, they want the premiers to push Ottawa to restore the wage and rent subsidies to levels used in the spring. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canada owes no debts to its allies for their help in standing up to China and bringing the Meng Wanzhou and Two Michaels affair to a close. In a year-end interview with the Canadian press, Mr. Trudeau says Canada and the U.S. resolved the nearly 3-year standoff with China by holding firm to the shared belief in the rules-based international order. Two imprisoned Canadians, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, were released in September after over 1,000 days in Chinese prisons. This came after U.S. authorities abandoned their prosecution of the Huawei executive on fraud charges. Well, by the end of next year, a nationwide ban could be in place on plastic grocery bags and styrofoam takeout containers. The federal government is publishing draft regulations that will ban the manufacture, import, and sale of 6 single-use plastic items, including plastic stir sticks, cutlery, and 6-pack rings. Some plastic straws will be allowed to accommodate people with disabilities or those with medical reasons. The RCMP has spent more than $6.8 million enforcing a court injunction against blockades set up to prevent old-growth logging on Vancouver Island. A document obtained by Global News under Access to Information Law shows the majority of the policing costs at Fairy Creek went to personnel. It was listed at nearly $4.7 million, along with $1.4 million for transportation and telecommunications. The protests over old-growth logging near Port Renfrew have led to nearly 1,200 arrests since Mounties began enforcing the injunction last spring. Staff Sergeant Janelle Shoyet says enforcing an order from the BC Supreme Court is not an optional invitation or suggestion. All right, well, meanwhile, British Columbia's intrinsic Highway 5, also known as Coquihalla Highway, has been reopened to essential travel only. The key link between Metro Vancouver and BC's interior had been closed for over a month. This as crews work to rebuild or patch 20 sections of roadway that broke apart or washed away after last month's flooding and landslides. Staff at NCI Radio in Manitoba are celebrating 50 years of broadcasting to Indigenous communities in northern Manitoba. The FM station broadcasts to communities that other radio stations can't reach. Roz McIver hosts the Indigenous Music Countdown. And she says NCI is a safe place for listeners to forget about everything negative and bad in their lives and just have fun on air with their favorite music. All right, we'll be right back with an interview with the mayor of Brampton after the break. That and, of course, more news from around the world only on Forum Daily News. So stay tuned. We'll be back very shortly. Toronto, Calgary, and Brampton are among cities across the country that are uniting to support a legal fight against Quebec's secularism law. It was recently used to remove a teacher from her classroom for wearing a hijab. Brampton was the first to pass a motion to provide $100,000 to the National Council of Canadian Muslims, the World Sikh Organization of Canada, and the Canadian Civil Liberties Association to support the legal fight. Brampton Mayor Patrick Brown has said Bill 21, which bans public servants from wearing religious symbols on the job, is discriminatory. Mayor Patrick Brown joins us now on Forum Daily. Sir, welcome to the show.
My pleasure to be with you today.
So what have been the most recent developments around this legal fight against Bill 21, sir?
Well, first of all, I should say we've been inundated with cities across the country that have said they want to step up. They want to defend religious freedom as well. You know, we're probably closer to the range of 20 to 30 major cities that have said, count us in. If the federal government is going to be absent in defending our own Canadian charter, then we're prepared to step up. And what the genesis of this is this bill, Bill 21, which can discriminate based on faith, and you can lose your employment. You know, whether you're wearing a turban, a hijab, or a cross, the notion you can lose your employment based on your faith is blatant discrimination. And the groups that are challenging this in the court have done it largely on the backs of small donations, $10 and $20 donations, crowdfunding. And they've raised $1.1 million. But to take this to the Supreme Court is going to take about $3 million. And they're up against the government of Quebec that has unlimited legal resources. So it's not a level playing field. 2 years ago, they had hoped the federal government would step in. But because they haven't, you know, they were in a precarious position where they could lose a Supreme Court battle simply because of a lack of resources. And I hope that this intervention by Canada's big cities will level the playing field and make sure that we can have a well-funded, articulate argument in the defense of religious freedom.
And we know Brampton really spearheaded this initiative to support this legal fight. So why did Brampton decide to make this move in the first place?
Well, I believe religious freedom is a foundational value. And there's many people that come to Canada because they face religious persecution abroad. You know, Canada has proudly spoke about religious freedom at international conferences. We actually had an ambassador of religious freedom that was appointed during Prime Minister Harper's time in office. And the notion that we would be speaking about religious freedom abroad, talking about persecuted minorities, but then turning a blind eye to a province that was diminishing religious freedom is hypocrisy. You know, if we're going to speak about religious freedom abroad, we need to defend it at home as well. And the notion that we have individuals losing their employment because of their faith in Canada is unconscionable. And this Supreme Court battle, it's going to go to the Quebec Court of Appeal right now, but it will end up at the Supreme Court. If we have a precedent in our country, a legal precedent that says you can discriminate based on faith, well, that will give permission to other premiers in other parts of the province to do the same. I don't want to see a legal precedent that would allow discrimination. And so many people say, you know, it's only happening in Quebec. Well, this would give a precedent for it to happen elsewhere, and it shouldn't be happening in Quebec either.
All right, sir, just over a minute left here, but let's get into Quebec's response so far. So the mayor of Quebec, or rather the mayor of Montreal, is saying that this initiative is counterproductive, and they're questioning the use of public funds against a provincial law. So what is your response to this issue here?
Well, there is public funds being used to defend a discriminatory provincial law. That's the challenge. Right now, they don't want a fair fight. They want to bully their way by having this discriminatory law upheld in the courts because they're fighting an opponent that doesn't have access to the public purse. By Canada's big cities stepping in, we're leveling the playing field. And I'd say, you know, I've spoken to mayors in Quebec, and their advice was, oh, you know, the premier's too popular. We should be silent. We should accept this bill. I'm sorry. I'm never going to accept discrimination. That's not our Canadian way.
All right, sir. And there are also concerns around this being perceived as an attack against Quebec or maybe a Canada versus Quebec issue. How would you address these concerns?
I love Quebec. I've got family in Quebec. I spent my summers as a child visiting Quebec. I spent 3 summers in Trois-Rivières learning French. I love the people, the culture. I love the province. What I don't support is a law that discriminates based on faith. And I know the spin doctors for the government are trying to say that any criticism of their policies are anti-Quebec. That's not the case. This is criticism of Bill 21, not the province of Quebec.
All right, Mayor Patrick Brown, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
My pleasure.
We'll be right back after the break with a look at distance learning in Canada. That and, of course, more news from around the world, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced a transition from traditional in-class learning to distance learning for both students and educators. But it has also revealed where the current system falls short. The Information and Communication Technology Council, a not-for-profit national centre for expertise in Canada's digital economy, published a report on December 8th titled Uncharted Waters Towards a World-Class Canadian E-Learning Program. The report interviewed subject experts, parents, and students to explore distance learning in Canada and abroad. It also focuses on how to better the experience of Black Canadians, Indigenous youth, and people with disabilities. Here to unpack the report's findings is Mr. Trevor Kwan, Senior Research and Policy Analyst from the ICTC. Mr. Kwan, welcome to Forum Daily.
Welcome. Thanks for having me here today.
So what are the main findings from this report, sir?
Well, to put in context, this is actually the latest in a series of reports that we've done on education technology, and this one really focused on the implications of online distance learning. So to put it into context, we did a series of interviews with educators and subject matter experts across Canada, as well as a large-scale survey of over 1,000 students and parents across Canada. So, and I'll just highlight a few of the larger themes from the study. First of all, I would say that it's the suitability for online learning sometimes changes depending on the age of the students in terms of suitability. Most educators would say that it's certainly more appropriate for older students and can be a little bit more challenging for younger students. Younger students really benefit from some of the structures, scheduling, and the ability of socialization, which is such a crucial piece for younger students. Another kind of interesting piece is around inclusion and inequalities. It's I think it's kind of taken for granted in the early on that everyone will be able to smoothly make this transition to online learning. And as we saw in the last 2 years, that it has been more challenging for different groups, and we really need to make sure that everyone can fully participate in this. Certain groups have found the transition far more difficult, including certain minority groups as well as students with disabilities. Who it was being a very quick and challenging sort of path over there. In terms of educator experiences, it's worked out quite well. I think overall, educators managed this transition in an admirable sort of way, and kind of the system went on. However, I think it's also worth noting that a lot of it has depended on the comfort level and the experience of the individual educator. It was again, a forced sort of transition. And so it can be some variability in how comfortable individual teachers felt to navigate this. Mm-hmm. In terms of survey findings, it was a roughly even split for students, whether or not they enjoyed online learning over the last, in the recent period, but it was seen more negatively by parents. Overall, around 80% of students had access to a computing device. However, around a quarter of them had a shared device, so it could provide challenges for them. And we've also found some issues around accessibility for internet, with around 40% of parents in rural and remote areas had trouble trying to help their entire family to be online at the same time for online learning, as well as that transition to remote work.
All right, sir. Well, I find it really interesting that you're focusing on how this impacts minority communities. So tell us a little bit more about the impact on Black or Indigenous Canadians, or even students with disabilities, when it comes to online learning.
Well, first, I really want to make it clear that this is looking at the implications and the applications for all Canadian students, but it has certainly has a potential to impact some groups more than others. It's exaggerated some of the pre-existing inequalities that we face in Canada. I think the biggest piece is around access. So certain groups face socioeconomic challenges, and so we see certain minority groups like Indigenous and Black Canadians have faced particular challenges during the pandemic. And as we see in the Stats Canada data, they've faced more recent challenges in terms of household finances, as well as kind of historical issues that means that it can be more difficult to get access to their own personal computing devices, as well as reliable, affordable internet access. And this is, of course, worsened for rural and remote communities that might not have the same sort of broadband internet availability.
All right, sir.
And if I can talk briefly around the students with disabilities. I think this is a group that is really worth highlighting because they've lost a lot of the support that occurs in in-person learning with this kind of forced transition that we saw in the recent period. So technology has offered great opportunities, but it has also provided some challenges as they don't always translate well to the unique circumstances of the individual.
All right, Mr. Kwan, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily. We'll be right back after the break with a look at stories from around the world as the Biden administration's key domestic policy bill is facing an uncertain future, and Russia's president delivers a speech to top military officers. Democrats are trying to pick up the pieces after West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin effectively crushed U.S. President Joe Biden's big domestic policy bill. They faced serious questions on Monday over whether the $2 trillion initiative can be refashioned to win Mr. Manchin's crucial vote. Otherwise, the party will be saddled with a major defeat. White House officials say they will work hard to finish the deal, but the conservative Mr. Manchin and his party are so far apart, it's hard to see how they can even go back to negotiations. Russian President Vladimir Putin delivered a speech to top military officers, once again demanding guarantees that NATO will not expand east. Mr. Putin blamed the West for what he described as the tensions that are building up in Europe. Russia is demanding that NATO deny membership to Ukraine and other former Soviet countries, and that it roll back its military deployments in Central and Eastern Europe. Russia's own troop buildup near Ukraine has raised fears of a possible invasion. All right, well, meanwhile, Ukrainian authorities have notified the country's former president that he is being suspected of high treason and aiding terrorist organizations in Ukraine's pro-Russia separatist territories. A statement by authorities said former President Petro Poroshenko is suspected of facilitating the activities of the self-proclaimed Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics by having his government buy coal from them in 2014 to 2015. His political party calls the claims politically motivated by the current government. Spain's vaccination rate of 90% of adults is the envy of the world. But the new Omicron variant is forcing authorities to reinstate serious restrictions just when people were hoping to enjoy their winter holidays. Catalonia, home to the northeastern city of Barcelona, is prepared to become the first Spanish region to put back in force a nightly curfew and shut down nightlife. This with COVID-19 cases filling 30% of its critical care beds. Spain is back in the high-risk zone with over 600 cases per 100,000 inhabitants over 14 days. This is more than double the accumulated cases seen before last year's winter holidays. Britain has announced a £1 billion fund in grants and other aid to help the hospitality industry survive the onslaught of the Omicron variant of COVID-19. The government on Tuesday bowed to days of pressure from pubs, restaurants, and other businesses that have seen income plunge following public health warnings. Businesses in the hospitality and leisure sectors in England will be eligible for one-time grants of up to £6,000 each. An additional $100 million will be given to local governments. Iran claims its top diplomat to Yemen has died after contracting the coronavirus. The death of Ambassador Hassan Irlou came on Tuesday, and after he was recalled from war-torn Yemen for what Iran described as medical treatment. A war between Iran-backed Houthi rebels and a Saudi-led military coalition has raged in Yemen for 6 years. The Wall Street Journal earlier reported that Mr. Irlou was being removed from his post over growing strains between Iran and the Houthis. A United Nations official says more than 160 migrants have drowned in 2 separate shipwrecks off Libya over the past week. The fatalities were the latest disasters in the Mediterranean Sea involving African and Middle Eastern migrants seeking a better life in Europe. The deaths have brought the year's tally in the central Mediterranean route to around 1,500. The governor in a central Philippine province devastated by Typhoon Rai last week has pleaded for the government to quickly send food and other aid. Arthur Yap of Bohol province warns that without help, army troops and police will have to be deployed to prevent looting among the hungry in his island province of 1.2 million. The typhoon left at least 375 people dead in the Philippines and 50 others missing. Hundreds of protesters marched throughout the streets of the Afghan capital on Tuesday toward the shuttered U.S. embassy, calling for the release of Afghanistan's frozen assets. The Taliban provided the protesters with security. International funding to Afghanistan has been suspended, and billions of dollars of the country's assets abroad, mostly in the United States, were frozen after the Taliban took control of the country in mid-August. A SpaceX Falcon rocket blasted off on Tuesday, carrying a Dragon capsule filled with 2,900 kilos of Christmas gifts and supplies for the International Space Station. The Dragon is carrying Christmas presents from the astronauts' families, as well as smoked fish, turkey, green beans, and fruitcake for a holiday feast. All right, I'm Nima Rajat, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll see you next time, Canada. Take care.